I always believed escape pods were for other people. You know the type, the nameless crewman in the background, the unlucky technician whose only narrative purpose is to eject dramatically while the main characters continue the story. I was an orbital linguistics contractor, not a hero, not even officially part of the crew of the Virex station. My job was to sit in a glass-walled translation bay and turn alien signals into something Command could understand before they turned us into dust. That belief, that escape pods were theoretical, lasted right up until the station alarms began screaming like they were alive. Red lights stuttered across the curved corridors. Artificial gravity wobbled, then snapped back with a lurch that sent loose equipment skidding. The intercom crackled with overlapping voices, panicked and clipped until the station AI finally asserted control. All non-essential personnel report to evacuation routes. Hull breach detected in sectors 7 through 11. Non-essential. That was me. I'd been halfway through decoding a repeating signal from the outer drift, something old, something layered with meaning, when the lights went red. I remember hesitating, fingers hovering over the console, thinking that if I just finished one more pass, maybe. Another explosion cut that thought cleanly in half. The wall to my left bowed inward, metal screaming as pressure dropped. Emergency bulkheads slammed down just in time, sealing me in a corridor that smelled of ozone and burnt plastic. I didn't wait for a second announcement. I ran. The evacuation route curved toward the pod bay, my boots thudding against the deck, while the station groaned around me like a dying animal. People shouted. Someone cried. A service drone lay smashed against a wall, sparking uselessly. I reached pod bay sea breathless, heart trying to escape my chest ahead of me. And that's where I saw her. She stood in the center of the bay like she belonged there, tall, still, utterly calm while chaos tore the station apart. Her skin caught the emergency lights in shifting shades of deep violet and silver, as if the colors couldn't decide where to settle. Her eyes, arranged in a graceful arc, regarded the room with unsettling focus. Thin bands of bioluminescent markings pulsed faintly along her neck and arms, reacting to something I couldn't hear. She wasn't human. That wasn't unusual in itself. Virex hosted dozens of species, but something about her presence bent the air around her, like gravity was paying more attention than it should. She turned as I stumbled into the bay. Our eyes met, and she smiled. It wasn't a threat smile. It wasn't predatory. It was warm, almost amused, as if she'd been expecting me specifically. Your pulse is elevated, she said, in perfect, lightly accented standard. You should slow your breathing. Panic reduces survival odds by 31%. I stared. The station is breaking apart. Yes. She inclined her head. I am aware. Another tremor shook the bay. One of the escape pods detached prematurely, firing into space with a roar. The countdown timers above the remaining pods flickered to life. Limited seats. Limited time. Are you crew? I demanded.
No.
Passenger?
No.
I swallowed. Then why are you here? She glanced at the pods, then back at me. Because this is where futures diverge. That was the moment I decided stress had finally broken my brain. We reached the same pod, at the same time. Pod C7. 2 seats. Manual launch. Relief flooded through me, until the floor lurched violently and she was suddenly pressed closer, one long arm bracing against the pod's frame. The proximity made my translator implant buzz faintly, struggling to keep up with subtle shifts in her speech patterns. She smelled like ozone and something unfamiliar, faintly metallic and sweet. You should enter, she said. I didn't argue. I scrambled into the pilot seat, hands shaking as I strapped in. She followed, movements fluid despite the chaos, and sealed the hatch with a practiced motion. The pod systems flickered on. Oxygen stable. Navigation minimal. Auto-return beacon active. Then the pod shuddered again, harder this time, and warning lights flared. Seat occupancy error. The display blinked red. I frowned. That's weird. It says. The pod lurched. One of the side panels exploded inward, showering us with sparks. The pod's AI chimed in, maddeningly calm. Structural integrity compromised. Weight tolerance exceeded. Her eyes widened slightly.
Ah.
What do you mean, ah? She looked at me with something like regret. There is only capacity for one, she said softly. The words landed like a physical blow.
No.
No, that's not right, I said, frantically checking the straps, the readouts. It's rated for two. 2 humans, she corrected gently. Or species of comparable mass density. I exceed acceptable parameters. Another explosion rocked the station. The pod's clamps began to release automatically. Time collapsed into a thin, screaming line. Get out, I said without thinking. I'll take another pod. There are no others within viable distance, she replied. And your survival probability without this pod is less than 8%. That's still. She moved faster than I could react. One moment she was seated beside me. The next, she had unbuckled my restraints with deft precision, lifted me bodily from the seat, and set me back down before I could process what was happening. Then she sat in my place. The pod systems chimed happily as the weight reading stabilized. Hey! I lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Her skin was warm, thrumming faintly beneath my fingers, like a living engine. She met my gaze, all 4 eyes intent. You are necessary, she said. I am not. That's not your call. It is, she replied quietly. I have already lived longer than most stars you admire. The clamps disengaged with a bone-deep thunk. The pod began to slide toward the launch rail. Panic roared through me. You can't just, this isn't fair. Fairness is a local concept, she said, smiling again. Survival is not. She reached up, gently prying my fingers from her arm. I will remember you, she added. The pod tilted. I don't even know your name, I shouted. Her bioluminescent markings flared brighter, a soft cascade of light that etched itself into my memory. Then remember this instead. She leaned forward and kissed my forehead. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't chaste. It was profound, like a promise written directly into my nervous system. My implant overloaded, flooding my mind with impressions, vast distances, ancient routes between stars, songs sung in gravitational waves. I will return, she said, voice resonating with layered harmonics. When the paths align again. The pod launched. I was thrown backward as the sudden absence of mass and momentum ripped her from my reach. The bay doors slammed shut. The pod vanished into the star-flecked void. And I was alone. I survived. That part still feels unreal. A secondary blast blew me clear of Pod Bay C, sending me tumbling into a maintenance corridor just as emergency bulkheads sealed. Rescue crews from a nearby trade convoy arrived 6 hours later, picking survivors out of the debris field like prayers someone hadn't expected to be answered. They asked me questions. Medical scans. Psychological evaluations. Everyone asked about the woman. No one believed me. There was no record of her boarding the station. No biosignature matching her description. No unauthorized access logs. According to the data, Pod C-7 launched with a single occupant, me. I stopped arguing after the 3rd debrief. The dream started a week later. Stars folding into new geometries. A voice singing from the dark. The sensation of motion without movement, of waiting that wasn't passive, but deliberate. Sometimes I'd wake with the phantom warmth of her touch still lingering on my skin. I returned to work eventually, though I transferred off deep space stations. Too many reminders. Too many escape pods. Years passed. The galaxy, as it tends to do, moved on. Then, during a routine translation contract, I intercepted a signal. It wasn't meant for human ears. It threaded through subspace in elegant, spiraling patterns that made my implant hum with recognition before I consciously understood why. My hands shook as I began to translate. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a demand. It was a message. The paths are aligning. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, and laughed, a sound that startled my coworkers. She hadn't lied. Somewhere beyond mapped space, among stars older than fear, she was coming back. And this time, I wouldn't let her take my seat again. I didn't report the signal. That was the first real choice I made after Virex Station died. Protocol said I should forward any unclassified transmission to the Relay Council. Common sense said I should pretend I never saw it. But something deeper, something she'd left behind when she kissed my forehead, told me this message wasn't meant to be processed by committees or filtered through fear. It was meant for me. I isolated the data stream, shut down my translator implant's auto-share function, and locked myself into my quarters. The signal repeated every 43 minutes, each cycle slightly altered, like a heartbeat adjusting to movement. As I listened, patterns unfolded that weren't linguistic in the human sense. They were navigational, emotional, temporal. This wasn't just a message.
It was a map.
I spent the next 6 months chasing it. I resigned my contract, liquidated everything I owned, and bought passage aboard an independent survey vessel that specialized in fringe space anomalies. The captain didn't ask many questions. People who work the edges of civilization rarely do. They've learned that curiosity is often safer than skepticism. The ship was called Wayfarer's Wake, an old but stubborn thing that hummed like it remembered better days and intended to reach them again. Each jump carried us farther from charts and closer to places where stars burned colder and space-time behaved like a suggestion instead of a rule. The signal grew stronger the farther we went, resolving into layers my implant could barely keep up with. At night, I dreamed less of chaos and more of purpose. I dreamed of her waiting. 3 weeks into the voyage, the first impossible thing happened. We detected an object that wasn't there. Sensors showed nothing. Visual scopes showed nothing. But gravitational instruments bent around a mass that should have crushed us or torn the ship apart. Instead, it welcomed us, guiding our trajectory like a hand at the small of your back. The captain swore softly. "That's not a black hole." "No," I said, heart pounding. "It's a door." The object unfolded as we approached, not opening so much as remembering it could be something else. Space peeled back into an iridescent corridor threaded with light and shadow, stars refracted into impossible angles. No alarm sounded. No systems failed. It was as if the universe itself had decided we were allowed to pass. We emerged somewhere that shouldn't exist. A lattice of structures hung between stars like a cathedral spun from gravity and light. Massive arcs curved through vacuum, etched with glowing symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the same patterns from my dreams. Ships were docked there, sleek, organic vessels grown rather than built, their surfaces alive with subtle motion. My breath caught. "She's here," I whispered. The Wayfarer's Wake was hailed immediately. The transmission bypassed standard channels, resolving directly inside my implant with a clarity that nearly brought me to my knees. "You followed the promise." I laughed, a sound that came out broken and wet. "You said you'd return." And I have. We docked. The air inside the station, if that's what it was, felt charged, humming softly against my skin. Gravity adjusted itself instinctively to my movements, like it was curious about me. I stepped onto the platform alone. She waited at its center. She looked the same and completely different. Her bioluminescent markings were brighter now, more complex, tracing patterns that shifted like living constellations. She wore no clothing as I understood it, only bands of energy that curved around her form with elegant restraint. When she saw me, all four of her eyes softened. "You lived," she said, unnecessary but heartfelt. "So did you," I replied. She tilted her head. "Barely." We stood there, the space between us heavy with everything unsaid. "You promised," I said finally. "I promised to return," she corrected. "Not that it would be soon." I exhaled slowly. "Why me?" Her gaze drifted outward, toward the lattice of stars beyond the station's vast windows. "Because you did not hesitate," she said. "Not when fear demanded it. Not when survival offered excuses. You chose connection over certainty." She looked back at me. That choice echoed. She led me through the station, through halls where beings of impossible diversity moved with shared purpose. Some acknowledged me with nods or subtle shifts of color. Others watched with open curiosity. I felt small. I felt seen. At the heart of the structure lay a chamber that defied scale. A sphere of compressed space-time hovered at its center, threads of energy weaving in and out like breath. "This is a convergence point," she explained, "where paths that should never meet are allowed to intersect." "You built all this?" I asked. Her lips curved faintly. "We tend it, like gardeners." "And the galaxy?" I gestured helplessly. "The wars? The collapse zones? People killing each other over scraps of territory." She regarded me quietly. "Civilizations are storms. We do not stop storms. We study how they pass." Anger flared in my chest before I could stop it. "You let billions suffer." "We let billions choose," she replied gently. "And we intervene when a single choice can change more than 1,000 decrees." She stepped closer. "You are one such choice." I swallowed. That escape pod wasn't supposed to be destiny. "No," she agreed. "But it became a fulcrum." She raised her hand, palm open. Images bloomed between us, timelines branching, collapsing, reforming. In most, she died aboard the failing station. In many others, I did. In only a handful did either of us survive. "In all viable futures," she said softly, "you were the constant." The weight of that settled into me slowly, like gravity finding its preferred direction. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends," she said, "on whether you will take the seat you were meant for." A platform rose from the chamber floor, forming a shape I recognized with a jolt. An escape pod. Larger. More elegant. Designed for two. "I'm not leaving," I said immediately. "I didn't come all this way to be saved again." She smiled, fully this time, openly. "Good," she said, "because this one does not launch away." She extended her hand.
"Stay," she said.
"Learn. Observe. Help us translate your people to the wider cosmos, and the cosmos back to them." The enormity of it stole my breath. "Forever?" I asked. She considered. "Time behaves differently here." I thought of Earth, of contracts and stations, and quiet rooms full of half-decoded signals. I thought of the promise burned into my memory of a woman who had crossed the stars to keep her word. I took her hand. "Yes," I said. The station seemed to exhale. Lights surged through the chamber, weaving around us, threading our silhouettes into the living architecture. I felt my implant rewrite itself, expanding to meet languages that hadn't yet been spoken. She stepped closer, resting her forehead against mine. "This time," she said, "we leave together." And somewhere, far behind us, the galaxy turned, unaware that a single escape pod seat had once changed its future forever.